Greetings, family. Welcome back to the Learning channel here on YouTube. Thank you for visiting. The topic of today is geopolitics, world history, and freedom for Black people. I was going to say war, but we must collectively find our way out of this madness, because that's what's going on. We keep seeing war. So I say freedom to focus on potential solutions. War, however, might be one of the solutions. Now, I'm not here to talk about just straight up uh, us warring, but just the realities of what's going on in the world. So this is presented because of the hypocrisy of the United States government and the display of full-scale ignorance of the plight of people of African descent. So this is January that this is being presented. So I look at January as the jagged walk to freedom. Why do I say that? Well, we are here in January where there's the celebration for Martin Luther King. So he was a warrior that forced through the jagged nature of this beast in the civil rights movement. He was the master all-star, so we had to honor his work and his life. So we honor his birthday in January. If you did not know, January 1st, 1804, Haiti gained independence. A jagged walk to freedom. They fought for it. They died for it. And do we acknowledge that? Well, maybe not. If you did not know, it was 1804 and January 1st when that happened. And then for this particular segment on geopolitics, we got to go to Africa. And we have to talk about the Congo and Patrice Lumumba. Because why? He was assassinated 62 years ago in January 7th. So when we say January, the jagged walk to freedom, we're talking about birthdays, assassinations, independence movements, all that going on in this time frame. So when I say, how do we have a purveyor of violence, that is the President of the United States speaking at a MLK, Martin Luther King commemoration service for him who spoke about nonviolence, and you have the president bringing Ukrainians here to the United States, giving them tanks, giving them weaponry, giving them training to fight a war. You're escalating this situation. This whole scenario is really white-on-white crime. Yes, I just said it. White-on-white crime. So you now have the United States being involved in that. More white people involved in that. Of course, there's other players that are involved in the military, from Hispanics, Asian, Black people that are in the military. But this situation, and the United States being involved in that, you're escalating the violence. You're escalating the war, which means maybe you want it because people are making money on both sides of the war with the weapons. Let us be clear, white-on-white crime should not be our concern. You are calling on God as African people, and they are calling on tanks. Let's be real about it. Mark my word, Ukraine will be rebuilt before any other African nation is brought to modernization. I mean, they got, civilization going on in Africa. There's many places that have businesses and enterprises. But when we speak about the access to having those countries move to a higher level, there's no real interest in having the money go there. And then you think about Haiti. If Haiti gained independence in 1804, and you see the struggles that they're going through right now and have continually going through, the hypocrisy of talking about supporting places for independence. And so when we talk about Lumumba, we have to talk about the realities of what went on there, compare that what's going on with those people of African descent living here in the United States. I bet you there'll be no reparations before Ukraine gets built. No modernization for certain of those African countries before Ukraine gets rebuilt to game. So when we start talking about the game, let me try to play this little segment for you about diamonds. I say diamonds, I mean there's an empire that's going on. I had an old school video of this back in the day. Well, I don't have videos anymore. Guess what? You can go on YouTube and find this. So on your own time, watch this. But what I want to do is maybe I can play a little segment of this right now for you to understand where I'm going with this.
Last year, Americans spent more than $10 billion on diamond jewelry.
Nobody's aware that diamonds and all the associations we have with diamonds is a product of a marketing strategy. It's completely invisible, transparent. If you measured in terms of how all the myths associated with this advertising campaign have been deeply inculcated in people. It's reached deeply into the popular imagination. This is probably the most successful campaign in history.
Tonight on Frontline,
Diamonds? Aren't they a girl's best friend? Did something change?
are diamonds what we think they are? Precious and rare.
I wound up discovering it was just the opposite. Everywhere where there's carbon, which is everywhere, you find diamonds.
Frontline examines the cartel that controls the diamond trade, the supply, the price, and the myth.
What makes this cartel different is it's controlled by a single company.
Tonight, the Diamond Empire.
And you're going to watch this on your own in your own time. What I'm going to do is play a segment in here that leads me into talking about what happened in the Congo. So when we are able to explain that, it puts into context about this geopolitics. All these games going on with these movies, from Avatar to Wakanda, or Black Panther to Wakanda Forever, about resources. Land is the basis of all revolutions. On land is what contains the resources. So check this out.
Making deals with colonial
where no one dared to pass from there, diamonds or no diamonds. So to put it bluntly, we were a terrorist group. That's what it amounts to.
The cartel denies that Camille worked for either DeBeers or Anglo-American, and says his accusations are part of a vendetta against them. By the 1950s, the diamond cartel had amassed enormous power, taking control of diamonds at the source, making deals with colonial powers, building its network mine by mine, country by country.
Of June 1960, this was a city of radiant joy as the people celebrated Congo Independence Day, a happy occasion full of bright hope.
In the 1960s, the rise of African nationalism presented new challenges to the cartel.
The army of the young republic marches by.
The Congo's first democratically elected leader, Patrice Lumumba, was critical of the colonial mining arrangements, and the local Belgian mining companies supported army actions against him.
A new chapter begins in the dark and tragic history of the Congo.
The coup against the leftist leader was backed by the CIA, and it ended in Lumumba's murder. Mobutu Sese Seko emerged as the dictator of what became Zaire. At first, he too sounded like an African nationalist.
Mobutu had made what seemed like very left-wing radical statements, talking about the colonial exploiters threatening to nationalize all sorts of foreign mining property. And in flies American businessman Maurice Tempelsman.
Maurice Tempelsman is an independent diamond dealer and a key intermediary for DeBeers.
When a matter of, 10 days, Maurice Tempelsman holds consultations in Brussels with key officials, meets with the U.S. Embassy in Kinshasa, has consultations with the U.S. State Department, speaks with Mobutu, flies on to go meet with Mr. Oppenheimer of DeBeers in South Africa in what, according to what is certainly shown by a number of declassified U.S. State Department documents, to be an attempt to stitch together a relationship between the DeBeers empire and the Mobutu regime. So it's very clear that from the very beginning of the Mobutu regime, Tempelsman had an important role in, to put it most charitably, advising and guiding Mobutu on how to deal with companies like DeBeers.
The Oppenheimers, through Tempelsman, arranged to have the exclusive supply of diamonds shipped to their offices in London. DeBeers has done well on Zaire's diamonds. So has President Mobutu.
for many years, there was a pattern and a practice whereby at regular intervals, Mobutu would send some of his agents to Miba, the diamond company, to take a look at the most recent production and to select out the best gem quality stones to be flown off, presumably to be sold for his account in Antwerp.
Madame Mobutu also has an eye for diamonds.
This is somebody who's traveling on a diplomatic passport, who just gets whisked right through customs, doesn't get stopped. However, there was one occasion a few years ago when Madame Mobutu went off to Belgium, and she forgot some of her luggage. She sent her secretary, apparently, back to Kinshasa or back to Gbadalit, where Mobutu has his main palace, to get the luggage. The secretary went into customs, didn't show the right kind of documents, was stopped and inspected, and according to the Belgian reports, was found carrying $6 million worth of diamonds. You just need one word. The word is kleptocracy. I'm not the person who invented that word. I wish I did, but it's been used by political scientists to describe governments whose fundamental organizing principle is one of theft.
Mobutu spends huge sums on an army to keep himself in power. He himself is one of the richest men in Africa, while his people are among the poorest.
Zaire has substantial diamond resources as well as other mineral resources, and the revenues generated from those resources could have gone to benefit the Zairean people, and they haven't. The revenues have gone for two purposes. They've either been siphoned off to Mobutu's private bank accounts, or they've been used to provide benefits for foreign governments or foreign companies, in the hope that those foreign governments and foreign companies will then be supportive of Mobutu and help him remain in power. I mean, essentially, Mobutu's used the wealth of Zaire for two purposes: to enrich himself and to enrich his foreign supporters.
Despite DeBeers' deal with Zaire, some mines in the country are beyond its control. These wildcat miners are fighting over a new claim. The diamonds they find will likely be smuggled out of the country to the few markets the cartel still doesn't control.
You're talking about a country which is certainly one of the two largest diamond producers in the world, where you have this Wild West kind of atmosphere. And looking at it from the outside, I would guess that this is the most difficult relationship over the years that a company like DeBeers could have with an African government.
This is an area of intense digging in Kapamba, which is...
In neighboring Angola, regulated diamond mining is a casualty of its devastating civil war. In 1992, wildcat miners there swarmed the diamond-rich dry riverbeds, picking up small fortunes in alluvial diamonds. DeBeers has spent an estimated $500 million to keep them from flooding the market and depressing prices.
Stripping and removing the ore.
Each time diamonds are found in an inconvenient place, they begin, the diamond cartel, through intermediaries, through law firms they hire, ways to think, how can we prevent these diamonds from reaching the market? And declaring something a national park, tying things up in litigation. These are just the methods, and there's an infinite number of different methods you could use once you understand what the objective is. The objective is to prevent mines from being developed that are outside their control.
Control. That's what it's all about, control. So, we're at this position where if you don't understand that, you continually be manipulated, get played like a drum. That's why if we don't study history, we don't read the books, understand what has happened, you just repeat the same thing. So in this January Jagged March to Freedom, We celebrate in July, Independence Day, or we got Juneteenth now. For those who didn't have independence, then we got February for Black History Week that now is a month. And so we have all these times to celebrate. So now we look at this January. So as I'm trying to explain this to you, we have some serious things to work on. So this whole story becomes controlled by people. So you can go look at this on your own. Hollywoodism, how the Jews invented Hollywood. And in the midst of this white person explaining this about what the Jewish people who are influencing things, dealing with Warner Brothers and Goldwyn, all these movies that came out, they pushed a certain message. And in the message, the messages were not for African people or people of African descent to be independent-minded and strong. So you see then the manipulation in the media, how people are then controlled to not really have control over their resources. So in Africa, it's the land mass with all the resources. Look at Africa, you got the Sahara, like so many different aspects of Africa, from the south part where you have certain elements and certain minerals, and you got West Africa, different kinds of minerals and resources, and you got Central Africa, the Congo we'll talk about, and then you got the Sahara where it's kind of like desert, but then you got North Africa, you got over here the Nile Valley civilizations and what they can produce. So all these different parts of Africa feed other parts of the world, like Europe. So when you watch movies and talk about Avatar and this, was it unobtainium? Unobtainium they're trying to get. You think about this fictitious Wakanda and the vibranium they're trying to get. So all these resources, the mentality is played in Hollywood, so you don't understand it in the real world. This is really what's happening. So the CIA becomes, that is a central intelligence agency, becomes very involved in manipulating these African countries, keeping them ass backwards, fighting one another, so that the people who are the corporations, who are running the corporations, can control the resources. So look at the middle of the of Africa, Congo, to blow it up over here. The Congo had different provinces. You got Leopoldville, you got Katanga, Kasai, you got different places, and each one of those regions had their own ethnic groups. And in that documentary on the diamonds was mentioned Angola. Angola has a bad history of the CIA manipulating that. You read about that in John Stockwell's book, In Search of Enemies. But here in the Congo, Patrice Lumumba was trying to organize all these people. But this also came after Kwame Nkrumah was doing his thing. So I'm going to break down some books to explain these people, but let me just get through this for you to understand. Again, land is the basis of all revolution, because the land has the resources. So now that's Congo in the middle of Africa. Now we look at this big problem going on with Ukraine that Russia, they say, has invaded. Russia says, look, that was part of us anyway. Russia had already got to Crimea. They already taken that over a couple of years ago. Now they moved on Ukraine. So Ukraine now is asking for help from the world powers. But you got Belarus there that's helping out Russia. So you got now these athletes from the different places like Russia and Belarus, like for in tennis, that they now go play in their particular events. They can't have the Russian flag flown or the Belarus flag flown. So now you got all these problems with people from Ukraine hating those people, and they're not even involved in this war. The point about this is that this individual named Zelensky, who came to America asking for help, guess what? So did Patrice Lumumba. What did Eisenhower do when Patrice Lumumba came here? He went golfing. Said, I don't feel like talking to that guy. So they weren't interested in real independence. So with Ukraine, they had this guy, Zelensky, giving reports to the Congress of the United States. They gave him a flag. He actually sat there in the Capitol and gave speeches. Lumumba, when he got independence in 1960, or the Congo got independence, and then he became the prime minister and then gave a lecture. He's there speaking, but I'll read a book that talks about the travails that he experienced. And again, he was assassinated. It was like 2 years from this time. So it was a tumultuous time period. So America dissed him, as in they didn't even want to talk to him, didn't want to work with him. Why? Because it came down to resources. It came down to things like uranium. Uranium was used for the bomb. Hiroshima and Nagasaki. I mean, those bombs that were those atomic bombs, that the only country that ever did that, the United States, blasted another country, that uranium came from this place. So the United States wanted to ensure that they had those mines, those, I think Shinko Loble, that was one of the names of the mines that contained that uranium. It was all about not allowing these African people to control those resources and also to be involved in so-called communist conspiracy. But I'm just saying the hypocrisy of the country gaining independence, including Haiti, the United States did not support. But now they're supporting this guy from Ukraine and Zelensky, and I wonder why. Interestingly, I had a magazine, National Geographic magazine, and the topic was the greatest journey ever told, the trail of our DNA. So it was talking about in March 2006 about DNA and evolution. It's like, oh, there's an article in here about Ukraine. Just thought it was interesting that, Ukraine had some modernization. A woman here grabs a kiss from a Kiev, like the big city there in Ukraine. One of the city's hottest night spots. Kiev's young and ambitious, most of whom are eager for Ukraine to join the European Union. If it splits over that, some want to be part of Russia, some want to be part of the European Union, got all that going on. Helped spark a peaceful uprising that came to be called the Orange Revolution. I just thought this was interesting because there's a little bottle on here. Can't blow it up, but that bottle right there, it says Olmec. So it's in the middle of Europe, Ukraine. You got this little bottle, this alcohol called Olmec. That's black people. That's Olmec. Those are over in the middle of Central America. But just interesting to see the people who don't really value black people too much, but they got names that relate to black people within the cultural experience. Curbside capitalism. So here's somebody on the side in Ukraine back in 2006 is the building behind. They got streets and all that and paved, and all that's being bombed out right now. Point is, I bet you this will be rebuilt before Haiti gets anything, before them African countries get modernized. Why? Because it's not about truthfulness and being democratic. It's about controlling resources. So hypocrisy is generated in U.S. immigration policies. So they weren't allowing a lot of the Haitian, Venezuelan, brown people coming in, but they made quick decisions on allowing these Ukrainians to come to America. I wonder why. Because they didn't have that melanin in the skin. So this whole issue of the hypocrisy of what they do, that the United States government does to allow some people in, some people out, we have to understand that. So there's universal discrimination towards people of African descent, black people. I wonder why. And it's because of the stronghold of being, just a human being, just to be free. So when Toussaint Louverture, Dessalines, and the crew got rid of the Spanish, the French, British, all these people are trying to control this land. So Haiti was like the breadbasket back there during colonization. It was the breadbasket. The money was being generated through this particular country. And they got their independence in 1804. So why is it now in 2022, 23, and they still got drama going on in Haiti? Because of bad policy to not allow this nation to rise again. So that's Haiti. Well, let's go to Chad. Just another country before we get to what I'm going to talk about in these books. Chad turmoil. Chad is a country there in North Africa, up there near Libya. Idris Deby was killed April 20th, 2021, the day after he was reelected. He was like the longest serving president, I believe, there in Chad. Interestingly, there was a guy named Hussein Habre, who was a brutal dictator. But you see who he was meeting with. There's the brutal dictator sitting down peacefully with Ronald Reagan. That's right, President of the United States. They're all in bed together. Because it's about what? Controlling the resources. So the CIA, the United States government, controlling African leaders. That's problematic. That's a problem. So this guy, Hussein Habre, was jailed and convicted in 2016 in a Senegalese court. So he fled Chad, ran away, living in Senegal, and the people were able to organize enough to have him committed on torture, rape, and crimes against humanity. He now led Chad from 1982 to 1990s. That's a long time of creating turmoil, but he was funded by the United States. Keep them people crazy. Keep them people fighting one another, and you keep taking the resources. So this story was broken by Reed Brody. He was a war crimes prosecutor. He has a book out called To Catch a Dictator. So if you get a chance to read up on Hussein Avery and the Chad turmoil, I don't only mention this because as you got all the mess going on in the country, you never know what's really happening. And so I have a 2002 article about 7 million old skull rewrites human history. They found this in Chad. They called the fossil Toumai, Toumai. This fossil they say is one of the oldest ancestors related to the human line. Not Australopithecus, Australopithecine, which this is like around 3.5 million. This goes back 3 million years before that. So when you keep the countries all confused, you're not really able to get to the source of really what's going on with humanity. So I'm only talking about the Chad problem because of this history and how things can get covered up. You start blowing things up, start flooding things out, like what happened in Nubia with the dams, Aswan Dam, all these dams. You got flooding water out certain places. Now you cover artifacts. That's a problem. So we have to understand how outside agents control certain parts of the world to contain control. So why would the colonizer be interested in Africa? Why would they be interested in helping people like with the jabs that have been going on with this problem we had in 2019, the COVID problem? Look, access to resources plus depopulation equals control. Think about that. Get rid of the people, control the resources. You're great. White people would love it if they had Africa with no black people. They have policies like that. The South Africans think that. If we could get rid of these black people and control the land, we'd be great. Think about Israel. What's going on with the Jewish people against the Palestinians? They could have that land, get rid of those Palestinians, they would be great. So they could set up an apartheid system. The same apartheid is going on in Israel, the same apartheid that was in South Africa, and the United States supports all of that. So I'm upset because my tax dollars, the money that I work for, 25% of my money goes to supporting military regimes that I don't support. So therefore, lies must be generated to make you think that's a good thing. We have worldwide manipulation of human behavior. Think about this. The guy up top there named Fauci, he says these jabs are highly effective. When people are vaccinated, they can feel safe that they are going to be not get infected. Now, he was infected after a couple shots. Biden says you're not going to get COVID if you have these jabs. Look, that's the start of the disinformation campaign. This informant who started the office of disinformation. Got a brother named Rizza Islam. I think it's only black brothers on the so-called disinformation 12 or something like that. So you got people that have now been vindicated because we know that this has been a game. Walensky, the so-called new CDC director, says jabbed people do not carry the virus and don't get sick. Garbage. And they just, even though that's not true, just permitted babies to be poisoned. And now you got this guy named Gates who you don't see anymore, you don't hear about from anymore. I wonder why that is. Quote, he says, everyone who takes the jab is not just protecting themselves, but reducing their transmission to other people and allowing society to get back to normal. You know that's not the case. Most people who got the jab, got sick. So the shot does not stop infection or transmission. It may make it worse. You're not going to hear that in the mainstream. And then now you don't even hear any stories about this MP, this thing called monkeypox. You don't hear about it anymore. But some people were awarded money to go ahead and study this. What? To create another vaccine, another jab, something else to generate money. It's all about. And as you're generating the money and doing that, you're also keeping populations under control. So Africa was not, fortunately, hit too hard by this problem. And there's a whole host. I've written some articles on that and books on that, and we can discuss that at some other time. But at this point, let's discuss some books. some documents so that we can understand what's going on. One of the documents I want to talk about is called White Malice. Before I go to that book, White Malice, because it's about really the devilish and evil ways that some of the European or the colonizers worked. Let me play this one segment about the DeBeers and how they were actually, that's how it works with colonization. You kind of manipulate things on both sides in terms of have your hands in one end, and on the other hand, you're doing something too. And that's how, again, weaponry works. You get people buying weapons on both sides of the war, you continue to make money. So let's look at this about the diamonds.
Back in South Africa, still the center of its power, the Diamond Cartel is also dealing with a political earthquake. What impact will the dismantling of apartheid have on the DeBeers monopoly? Harry Oppenheimer, the man who ran the cartel for 25 years, has been a longtime critic of the South African government's apartheid policy.
More peaceful conditions in South Africa as a whole. We have to believe, and by our practice demonstrate, that the pursuit of business efficiency and the search for a free and just society are not contradictory objectives, but in fact two aspects of the same thing, two sides of one coin.
He himself has publicly come out against apartheid on many occasions and continues to do so. I think the problem is, and this is where he's been criticized in the past, the problem is that the mining houses that he controlled made use of the migrant labor system. They made use of the compound system. They made use of the pass laws. They made use of all the institutions which in fact created apartheid. So in that sense, people questioned why, on the one hand, does this man oppose apartheid, but on the other hand, he makes money out of apartheid.
High up near Bulawayo, visited by
100 years ago, DeBeers' founder, Cecil Rhodes, laid the groundwork for the cartel's success in South Africa.
Ironically, the famous empire builder, in his commercial activities, turning the early diamond rush into a vast industry, sowed the seeds of apartheid.
Particularly after they discovered the diamond mines, what they were looking for was to try and create a workforce for those mines. And the problem was that they needed unskilled workers. But the problem was that most of the available potential labor force were black people living on the land. And in order to get them into the mines, they had to find ways of forcing them off the land. And one of the mechanisms they adopted was passing various taxes, such as poll tax, hut tax, even a dog tax, which forced people living on the land to pay cash to the government. And they didn't have cash because they were not part of a cash economy. So they therefore had to go into the mines to earn the money to pay the taxes.
That's devilish. Only a devil could create something like that. The colonizers functions like that. That's why when we watch these movies and the propaganda, man, we got to stop acting as though there's some benevolence going on with the CIA trying to help you. No, it's about destroying you. And that's why when we say about freedom, you're going to have to do something more than just pray for it. You have to do something like fight for it. So what I'm saying about when we study these people, that's Cecil Rhodes right here. Cecil Rhodes. This is a book written by Robert Rotberg, who's also, I believe, he was a Rhodes Scholar. So when people we hear about people getting a Rhodes Scholarship, it's in this person's name, who was destroying and killing Africans like they were, flies. Like, just get out of here and get them off the land. We just saw that. I'm excited about this book because I got it for $6.98. Used bookstore. Wealth of information that explains who this guy Cecil Rhodes was. And if he was killing people like flies, you got this guy named King Leopold II. Now, so Rhodes was in Southern Africa, Northern Rhodesia, Southern Rhodesia. Independence renamed it to the Zambia and Zimbabwe. So this guy named 2 countries after him, where he was taking all those minerals and trying to get them back to Europe. But King Leopold, he was killing Africans like they were gnats, cutting off hands if they weren't getting enough of the rubber that was needed for them to, as their resource that they were trying to, get from the people. So this is by Adam Hochschild. Adam Hochschild. His daddy was involved in all this earlier on, but he's doing some reports. And King Leopold's ghost, no friend of African people. And the crazy thing is that, from what I understand, reading this book called White Malice, King Leopold II never even went to Congo. So you're now from abroad managing this place and just decimating the people, killing them off, and you never even been to the land. That means you don't respect the people. They used to have a fair where they would bring the Congolese there to Belgium, and they would put them like in a zoo to kind of let the white people there know this is how they live there in Africa. It's a game. If you've never read a book called Atabenga, about a pygmy or short brother. Pygmy is a negative word with the San people. He was short, but he helped out some of those explorers coming to Africa. He helped them out coming to Africa, and then they then brought him to the Bronx in New York, put him in a cage. Had white people looking at him like this is the little African people in Africa. It's devastating. But the CIA and the covert recolonization of Africa. I believe I'm going to have to do a whole book review just on this one on another presentation. But this is written by Susan Williams from England. She discusses the whole story about what happened to Lumumba in the Congo. It talks about it's really based around Lumumba and Nkrumah. So Nkrumah was certainly before Lumumba. Ghana gained independence in 1957. Nkrumah, Lincoln University grad, helped out to start that. She goes over the history of the CIA, trying to thwart all that, and the CIA was involved in this brother's assassination. How do we now not acknowledge, deal with that, and act like it just happened in history? There's nothing else going on. No, you've had plenty of disruptions. We talk about that video with Mobutu, funded by the CIA. The guy Chad, funded by the CIA. In Angola, Jonas Savimbi, the mother leaders, Holden Roberto, funded by the CIA. We have to check that, question that. So Lumumba, got to read his work. What really led me to understand most of this, a book that I read years ago, From the Congo to Soweto. This is what really gave me an understanding of this storyline until I picked up that book called White Malice. Oh, that just had the explosive elements about what really was going on. It gives even a part in here about even with Andrew Young serving as ambassador, who was trying to help out with the Palestinians, and what Jewish people got him out of that position. So don't help the Palestinians out. Anybody who has an interest to help the Palestinians out is anti-Semitic. What the hell does that mean? No, you're trying to help people who are just oppressed. So this book, From the Congo to Soweto, talks about the United States government getting involved in African politics. It's not like they had any African colonies, that is the United States in Africa. Liberia was a connection, but it wasn't a colony. But they got involved in Congo politics because of the so-called Cold War in the United States and against Russia. With Lumumba saying we're going to nationalize these resources for the people. That scared the hell out of white people. Get the CIA involved, get them out of there. And then they stayed in there and they stepped on manipulating all other countries. So the Congo was the start of the U.S. getting involved from Eisenhower to Kennedy. And then you look at Mobutu, he had met with all those presidents up to Daddy Bush. He got out of power in 1992. You see that guy from Chad was also removed in the 90s. And so you had a tumultuous time period in African politics where there were a lot of problems going on. We can't look at Africa as being backwards because you think black people are backwards. No, it's because they were being manipulated, and the CIA had a role to play in that. Some people were trying to help out. Remember Ralph Bunche? Ralph Bunche got a Nobel Peace Prize for trying to bring the Palestinians and the Israelis together. This book here is just it's edited by Robert Edgars. It's the travel notes when Bunche was going through South Africa. But he also helped out Kwame Nkrumah, just like Martin Luther King went to Ghana to help out Kwame Nkrumah. They all went there for the celebration of their independence and the All African People's Congress conference. They were there. People were there. You remember Thurgood Marshall? Same with Jomo Kenyatta, Kenya. So we had a lot of our African leaders. Thurgood Marshall, also Lincoln University grad. He had an influence of trying to help out and trying to keep some connections. And it's just interesting. We start looking at some of these names. Tom Mboya, brother Dr. Jeremy Clark talks about him in his book called Africans at the Crossroads. But in that book, White Malice, he might have been a CIA plant. Anybody who has been coming over to the United States from the continent, and they happen to go to these white schools like Iowa, Hawaii, why not send them to HBCU? You don't want many of these Africans who you're now funding, that is CIA funding, coming to places like HBCUs where you're going to get some revolutionized thinking about how Africa must unite. That's Kwame Nkrumah. He went to Lincoln University and came on back to Ghana, and Africa must unite. Actually wrote this, though, after he was, I think, exiled. But you got these CIA-funded Africans going to the United States. One of them was Obama's daddy. I'll leave it at that and let you figure that out. Obama's daddy, funded by a CIA program. And so going to these white schools, you see that the mindset and the positions that they then get, and going back to Africa, they become great people that can be used for what control. Check out Kwame Nkrumah's life. The father of African nationalism. He was the ultimate Pan-Africanist. David Birmingham wrote this book, but again, read any book you can on Kwame Nkrumah and his life, not the CIA stories, the CIA version of it. Paul Robeson, oh my goodness, did they attack him or what? Here's his autobiography called Here I Stand. But Paul Robeson, I read that book, White Malice, and understood that the CIA, probably through the MK Ultra program, attacked him, gave him some kind of drug that made him feel paranoid. He was in a mental health institute for several weeks trying to get right. But Paul Robeson was all over the world. They got a mountain named after Paul Robeson in Russia. They got a university named after Patrice Lumumba in Russia. So Russia can't be the enemy to all African people. When Patrice Lumumba went to the United Nations, Khrushchev supported him. Other African countries, non-aligned countries, India, they supported Lumumba. Not the United States. Gave him no voice. And they did the same thing to Brother Robeson. This is a recent book called White Freedom, The Racial History of and Ideas by Tyler Stovall. Interesting book. I haven't gotten through this one all the way yet, but it gives some good dynamics about how you fight for liberty and why is it that white people have the monopoly on fighting for freedom. And then one last book we just talked about. Interesting. These are more recent books. This is American Poison: How Racial Hostility Destroyed Our Promise. It's by Eduardo Porter. He actually Mexican heritage, but lived in Sao Paulo, Brazil. But he knows about the issue of discrimination. But he's just saying that all the stuff we see about this Trumpism and all this make America great again, as in the mindset of going back to what lynching and things like that we had before. He discusses that. So this book, I'm going to do I don't want to make this too long, but I'm going to do a review on almost every chapter of this book. The chapters, it's almost written in segments. It's got 11 segments, and each segment has multiple chapters, almost like 40 chapters. Got through this in a week. Oh my goodness. And when I say in a week, his issue is about reading. There's one component that I'm going to leave you on this one about what Kwame Nkrumah did. So he's there in Africa without a cell phone, without the computers, without the internet, but he's changing the world without all that. So he had a Voice of Africa journal. And so this is what he's saying now about the journal being published. The journal published a wide range of articles such as imperialist weakening and dangers of NATO war bases in Africa. So now we have a problem today with NATO because NATO supported in Ukraine. Some people say that NATO shouldn't be involved, and now you got all that going on today. Dag Hammarskjöld, He was the head of the UN. He was killed on a plane ride. CIA was involved, but of course, the stories are not going to come out till 20 years later. Exactly what probably happened. But Kwame Nkrumah was trying to get people to see and understand what's going on in the world, but you can't know if you're not exposed. Above all, read. It instructed earnestly. Read everything, something of everything. It will enable you to develop a critical acumen, to sharpen your sword for the rapidly approaching final showdown with the foreign oppression. This focus on reading very much represented the convictions of Nkrumah, himself a voracious reader. And when I went to Ghana and went to his memorial, he had like 35 books he wrote. I didn't realize he'd written that much, but he also wrote a lot of that when he was exiled and he went to Guinea. Sekou Touré gave him an opportunity to be at peace. He had time to sit back and write. And one of the articles he wrote was dealing with the end of neocolonialism. So, I'm going to go over Fanon later on some other time, but he was influenced by Fanon's work about violence. Sometimes has to be met with what? Violence. So he wrote The End of Neocolonialism, but he spoke about, again, the issue of resources in Africa controlling. That's what really created the demise for him to be extricated. So his assistant, Genevieve Maurice, he was from South Africa, recorded Nkrumah's efforts to encourage reading among his close associates. You don't read enough, he would declare, to me or to his other close associates. He would turn to the shelves behind him. These were full of books, and he would carefully study the titles. Then he would take one from a shelf. The person before him might be a minister or a civil servant, or it might be me, so she says. Let me have a summary of this book, he would say. I have to have a paper on the subject. He has to prepare a paper on the subject. This might or might not have been true, but it forced the recipient not only to read, but to thoroughly study and absorb the subject. So Nkrumah was certainly bookish, but he was by no means an intellectual snob. He and the staff of the Bureau of African Affairs were eager to communicate with as many people as possible throughout Africa, but they were aware that most of them had never been given the opportunity to learn to read. It was therefore decided to include cartoons in the publications, which visualized the important messages of unity. Batsa, who was proud of the Bureau's achievement in delivering Voice of Africa and The Spark all over the continent. We were banned in many countries still under colonial rule, he wrote, but we managed to reach most countries by one means or another. You think about today with Twitter and Facebook censoring people so they can't get messages out there or messages that they would like. And just the whole issue of how that's being monitored today in countries like China. Back then, again, was no computers giving that. It was the written word. No frontier was safe. The British ruled Federation of Rhodesia and Nyasa land, which later became Malawi, banned Voice of Africa in July 1960, alleging it was seditious. Alphonse Abassa, a freedom fighter in Sierra Leone, requested more copies. Propaganda, he told the Bureau, was proving to be more powerful than guns. Let me end it on that. Propaganda proved to be more powerful than guns. We'll be back to this book for just an analysis of just white malice. Thank you for spending your time with me. Hope this was educational for you, and we will be back to figure this out. Thank you.